Welcome to the Power to Flourish podcast, where science meets the art of a beautiful life. I'm Dr. Andrea Line, positive psychologist, giftedness expert and coach, and modern-day spiritual godmother to brilliant, deep-feeling women. This isn't just another self-help podcast. It's a sanctuary, a sacred space to come back to yourself. Each week, we'll explore the emotional experience of gifted, sensitive women and what it means to live a life that feels as beautiful as it may look. Because flourishing isn't a luxury, it's your birthright, and your life is waiting. This is the Power to Flourish podcast. Welcome back to the Power to Flourish. I am your host, Dr. Andrea, and I have to tell you, I am so excited about this topic. I am just one of those nerdy people my entire life, or at least as long as I can remember. I love reflecting on a year and envisioning the next year. I'm just that girl. You know what I mean? And so I am so excited to share with you part of my own rhythms, end of year rhythms, entering into the new year rhythms, all the things. You know, there are certain rituals that they shape us, hopefully not because they're trendy necessarily, although some things get trendy, or just because they're efficient or whatever the case may be, but because over time, when we adopt the things that really work for us, they just become woven into the very fabric of who we are. And so what I'm going to share with you today are those very things. For me, one of my favorite rituals, if you want to call it a ritual, is closing out the year. Honestly, I don't remember a time in my life when I didn't love this. I don't know. I'm just that kind of person. I think even as a teenager, I just knew there was something special. Maybe it's my orientation towards wanting to plan and organize and tidy things up. I don't know, but I love the process of reflecting and looking back and pausing and then orienting toward what's next with intention. And as I've gotten older and older, I've found things that work really well for me, things that I've shared with my students and clients over the years, and I'm so excited to share them with you today. Now, as I record this, I'm in my home, but when you listen to this, I should be in beautiful, sunny, warm Hawaii with my daughter and granddaughter and her family. So I am really looking forward even just to listen to this myself as I maybe am basking on a nice warm beach somewhere, wherever you may be, whether you're fireside or in your bed or taking a walk, or maybe you're on a beach somewhere. I just hope that you can take a moment, settle in, maybe light a candle, wrap yourself up in a blanket. You might want to grab a notebook, honestly, just to take some notes. This is one of those kinds of episodes. Okay, so where do I begin? Now, you probably have your own rhythms and things that you do, which is beautiful. But if you're looking for some fresh new ideas, I'm just going to share what I truly, truly do. So before I even start doing anything, I begin with honesty. I know it's not very sexy. And let me be really honest here. So the year 2025 was, for me, a year of extremes. It was a year of deep, deep contrast. So I experienced deep, unexpected grief on the one hand. And then on the other hand, like in my same two hands, I was experiencing some of the most profound joy of my entire life. A lot, all of it was happening at the exact same time in the same season. This year held some of the most profound grief I've felt in decades that looked like old wounds resurfacing unexpectedly, losses I didn't anticipate, relational realities that I just had to face in a new way, again, unexpectedly. And with all of that, there were parts of my identity that I didn't even realize or know that I needed to release. I didn't even know that they needed to be released until some things happened. And I thought, oh, wow, this is a part of my identity that I've got to let go. So all of that was happening. And then at the same time, as I've shared before, but this year held some of the greatest joy. The birth of my granddaughter was truly the fulfillment of a promise God had whispered to me long ago, and one I never fully understood until that little girl was placed in my arms. So all that to say, it was joy and grief intertwined, often in the very same breath. And I don't know if you've ever had a season like that. It's not something I would say is typical for me. 2025 really stood out as, again, as I would call it, extreme. It was extreme. Extreme. Some things were extremely hard and some things were extremely amazing. It was good. I wouldn't call it a year of balance necessarily, but I would call it a year of wholeness, because everything was present. Everything was real. Everything was there, and I was present with it. So I would also say this year also just required me to honor my capacity in a new way. Things were shifting. My life changed in a way that I didn't plan. So me becoming a grandmother, I didn't plan that. I didn't really have any control over that, but it was a new identity that I stepped into this year. And that required some shifting of lots of other things and relationships and responsibilities and priorities in my life. There were certain relational rhythms I knew, even aside from becoming a grandmother, just with other things that I felt were coming up to the surface for me in terms of my priorities. There were certain things that had to shift. There were new and just different boundaries I needed to draw, not necessarily boundaries for life, but boundaries for a season. There were just places where I had poured outward for a long, long time. And it was good. And it was a season that I was in at that time. And I had to realize, and I realized earlier this year, and I remember telling my husband that I felt led. The way I would put it was I felt like God was calling me into a more inward space the beginning of 2025, and was calling me to prioritize my creativity, which was really interesting and very unexpected for me. I mean, I just, prioritizing creativity, even saying it out loud. I remember saying it out loud to him and thinking, one, I don't really know what that means. Like, I honestly didn't really know what that was going to look like. It also seems a little frivolous, even though, I don't think it's actually frivolous, but it was just an interesting thing that I noticed. And I knew that if I was creating more space for creativity, then I was going to have to say no to other things because, there's only so many hours in a week. So I just had to steward my time differently in 2025. That was all a shift. Separate from the fact that I was going to be spending almost 3 months and then ultimately over the course of the year, about 4 months with my daughter and new granddaughter. So a lot of things in my life needed to shift. And by the way, I've spoken about this before, but this is part of why gifted women struggle, because we often overestimate our emotional capacity and then we underestimate our creative calling. And like those two things could create this struggle if we're not careful and we're not listening and we're not aligning emotionally and creatively, right? So that's just a side note. But for me, I've been really surprised. I guess I'm just sort of reflecting now on my year. And this is what I do at the end of the year, right? I think all of us, if we can create a little space and time for it, it's really healthy. But I've been surprised, not totally surprised, I was going to say, by my resilience this year. I guess I've always been resilient. I mean, not because I necessarily want to be calling myself resilient, but because I've had a life that has grown that in myself. I think I'm surprised and happy that my tenderness and my grief and the hard things of this year did not prevent me from growing. In fact, I think the realities of everything from this year catapulted me. I'm glad when I reflect that my grief didn't totally prevent me from experiencing all the joy. That was, I felt like just another opportunity in my life to honor both the grief, but not get so sucked into it that I was totally robbed of the joy and the beauty right in front of me, which in the past I've had experiences, tragic experiences, unexpected things that it was really hard for me. Um, Again, I feel things really deeply. And so when grief and heartache and shock enter a picture, it it requires a degree of emotional, psychological agility, I think. Resilience is another word for it, but it just requires I guess emotional maturity to not deny the grief. Again, it was part of the story this year for me, but not to let it cloud every part of my 2025. And it didn't, thank goodness. And I'm also happy when I reflect that my real limitations as a human, I mean, let's be real. There's so many things I don't know how to do, so many things I don't want to do. But those limitations didn't prevent me from fulfilling dreams in my heart, goals that I had for myself this year. Things like I was I was able to fulfill certain things regardless of any real or just perceived limitations. So as 2025 ends, I think the word I mostly feel and that I feel good about living this year is aligned. I think that the things that mattered the most to me, I honored them. My family, my healing, my work, my creativity, my community, my friends, like the things that were just really the most important, I stayed true to. And that feels really beautiful and wonderful to me as I close out the year. So I would say that as I enter December, the end of the year, it's not necessarily something I only do in December. Honestly, I'm the kind of person that kind of like starts doing this in months towards the end of the year. So I drag it out. But certainly by the end of the year, I go through a process that I would say is both like structured if I think about it, and I'm going to outline it here, but also very intuitive. And it unfolds in four movements that I'm going to describe. They're not, I wouldn't call them steps necessarily or tasks, but really like movements. So the four movements in my reflection process, the first one is remembering. So I always like to begin here. I am a journaler. I like to say I like to write things down, and I joke with my husband that I have to write things down because if I don't, I won't remember them, which is kind of true. But I have been journaling, I mean, ever since I was little, but really consistently since I was like a teenager and then very much in maybe my mid to late 20s. So I have tons of journals. And what I like to do is I read through some of my journals, not just this year's, although that's usually the primary one. Sometimes I feel led to open up, maybe not read through the whole thing, but open up older ones. And sometimes I truly just like go with my gut. I just stand in front of all my journals and just kind of feel like, which one am I, drawn to, and open it up and start reading some things. But I love remembering and I love reading what I wrote in previous seasons, even if the previous season was only 3 months ago, because one, we just forget. We forget. And part of the beauty of writing these things down is because many times our dreams, our hopes, our prayers, if we write them down, they can take years to unfold, you know? And we can forget. We can forget like the details. So I love looking back and, like the scribbled things that I wrote either, with tears streaming down my face or in a peaceful moment, or the dreams that I wrote down at 2 a.m., or like the little intuitive nudges that I got, the questions, all the things, the little tiny miracles, just like, I don't know, all the stuff. I just like to write those down if I can. And I reread some of those moments, the things that I don't want to forget. It helps bring it to my memory. I look through some of the notes. Like I don't read it all word for word necessarily, but if there were particular seasons or hard things, I like to go through and realize how much I've changed or what has shifted in my life, or, just it can be really encouraging. It can also be confronting in a good way, confronting in the way that maybe we've been writing about the same darn thing year after year after year. I've definitely had this experience where I'm writing the same thing and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's like Groundhog Day. And it's a wake up call for me to, if I want my life, if things are going to be different, then things have to be different. Like I have to do some things differently. So that's part of my remembering process. I also am very much an external processor. Ha ha, says the woman who started a podcast. But I love to talk with my husband and, my close friends, because those conversations really help me see things that I might otherwise miss. So remembering 2025. So the word for 2025, and I haven't talked about this, but I'm going to get into it in terms of how I orient myself to the new year. So I started doing this years ago. I know it's I think very popular these days. And I don't know if everyone does it the way I do it, but the way I think about my year is I listen for a word that I feel like God is giving me for the year. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with someone just choosing a word that they want to focus on for the year. I think that's beautiful. I think that's great. Something that maybe you want, or something, But for me, I have found what I've always done is I've just prayed about it and I've listened and waited for the word to arise, if that makes any sense. And for some of you, you might be like, that sounds really woo-woo, but that's just the way I do it. And so oftentimes the word that I get is not a word that I personally would have thought to pick. And that's what makes it, I think, for me anyway, really cool, because I'm like, oh, what is this year going to be about? I do not have a word clear yet for 2026. So I haven't spent any time trying to figure that one out yet. But my word for 2025 was fulfillment, which could mean lots of things. And I remember as I was wrapping up 2024 and looking into 2025, I thought fulfillment, okay, well, that sounds really good. And I wonder what that's going to look like. And, now that I've lived through 2025, wow, it's arrived in ways I never could have really imagined or orchestrated myself. And that's why I like choosing a word this way, because it's not in my striving and it's not in my trying to make anything happen. But I felt like this year I can see fulfillment in so many ways. Goodness, there's fulfillment in my family, in some relationship stuff that I've been praying about for years, fulfillment of promises that I feel like God gave me, again, like feels in what feels like a lifetime ago. Fulfillment in my creativity, because I carved out some space, which includes launching this podcast. That is something that has lived in the back of my mind and heart for years. And I didn't know when it was going to be the quote unquote right time, but 2025, it felt like this was the year. And fulfillment and just there's a lot of things that I won't go into here, but things with my husband's career, things with just a lot of beautiful promises, some of which I have wondered about really for over a decade, well over a decade, that were fulfilled or beginning to get fulfilled in 2025, which is just crazy, especially when I go back to my younger self and having a sense of certain things and those things happening now. So it's very, very cool. But again, going into 2025, I had no idea what possibly this could mean. And I would say that I feel really fulfilled in my heart as I wrap up this year. The second part of my process, the second movement, as we might say, is the receiving. So the first one was remembering, the second one is receiving. And this is where I just sort of sit with myself and ask, what did this year give me? What was revealed? If you're a spiritual person, you might ask it in the way of, what did God reveal to me? What grew in me that I didn't expect? And I've already talked a little bit about that, I guess, in the remembering. But this is the, like, what did I receive this year? And for me, I would say probably the biggest receiving, aside from like the practical receiving of a grandbaby, which was like, oh, so amazing and so exciting. But I think that the biggest gift I received this year was a massive shift in my identity. And I have had shifts, healthy, positive shifts in my identity over the years. And honestly, if you had told me last year that this year there would be, I feel like it's almost a quantum shift. Like, that sounds kind of extreme, but I don't know how else to explain it. It's a qualitative shift. People on the outside might not notice it, but I can feel this sense of stepping into just a fuller expression of who I am and releasing and unburdening myself from a lot that I didn't even realize was still like kind of the way it like stuck on me, you know? So that was what I feel like I really received. And things about my identity were revealed, and things about the parts of my identity that needed to go were revealed. So that was really amazing. I've had a few moments, even some right before this 2025 started, where I felt like nudges and glimpses of things that I'm being called to. But receiving, when we receive, it is not about understanding everything. And there's lots that I have received in 2025 that I do not understand fully. And when I say receive, I can look back on 2025 and what I've received, but I'm still waiting to see the fullness of how it's going to play out, if that makes sense. But for me, it's stopping and noticing what has softened me this year, what's strengthened me, and what is preparing me. Like, how did I get prepared? I feel like, oh, I got really prepared this year. And so I'm going into 2026, like, with this anticipation, because I know there's going to be some shifts because I got prepared this year, if that makes sense. So that's the second part. So the third part in my 4 movements is releasing. Now, this is, this can be really tender, and I can talk about it now at the end of the year because I feel like, wow, I released a lot this year. But if you were to talk to me in the middle of the year, I probably wasn't I know for sure I was not in a place to really talk about it. Even with my closest friends, it took me some time to process because there was a lot that I was clearing out. For example, this year I released very old, long-standing expectations that I had on myself. Very long-standing, like so long-standing, I thought it was law. And I released those. Wow, it feels so light when that happens, right? Very outdated, but very familiar versions of myself. As I said, like my identity, that was probably the biggest, the gift of that is that my identity shifted, but the releasing was these old versions of myself, which were wonderful. Let me just say that. I feel like I want to pause because I love, I have compassion and love and so much understanding for those parts of my identity that I had to release this year. I mean, they served me. They served me. They were precious to me. It was time for me to release it. That's all. That's all. And sometimes we just come to a season where it becomes abundantly clear. So that was part of what I released. I released on a deeper level over responsibility. I feel like, again, this is an ongoing journey, but I had lots of opportunity this year to release some more. I had to release some family disappointments. I had to release some timelines that I had clung to that I just, I'm not in control of a lot of things. So I had to release that. And I know I said outdated versions, but I guess related to that are roles, like very clear roles that I have played in my life and have outgrown. And they're just roles I realize I don't need to carry, and I'm choosing not to carry moving forward. So those are just some examples. You will have your own, but there's that releasing part. And releasing, you might be like, well, how do you release? I mean, I have gone through the process of releasing all year long. I'm not going to walk you through that whole process of releasing, but for me, often is grieving, it's forgiving, whether you forgive out loud to someone or you just forgive them in your heart or you forgive yourself, whatever it looks like, but it's just releasing and letting it go. Okay, so these first three movements, remembering, receiving, and releasing, are how I honor the year that's ending. And in next week's episode, I'll share the final movement, reorienting, how I gently lift my gaze forward and begin turning toward a new year with intention and care. I cannot wait to share that with you. So stay tuned for next week. I'll see you in the new year. And until then, keep flourishing. Thank you for listening to the Power to Flourish podcast. I hope today's conversation left you feeling more seen, more supported, and more deeply connected to yourself. And if this episode resonated, would you take a moment to subscribe, leave a review, or share it with a friend? It's one of the best ways to help this work reach the women who need it most. You'll find show notes, links, and resources from today's episode at powertoflourish.com. And now just a quick reminder, this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It's not therapy, medical advice, or a substitute for professional support. And listening doesn't make me your therapist or doctor, though if you're looking for a coach, you know where to find me. All right, beautiful one, that's it for now. Until next time, trust yourself, honor your gifts, and keep flourishing.